Well, living in Northeast Tennessee and Tennessee as well, even Southwest Virginia, we are fortunate to have a green space all around us. And several members in the past have asked the program committee to invite someone to speak on our trees and forests. So we have here today Hannah Hollowell, who works for the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, Division of Forestry. She's in the Forestry Health Program as a specialist, and she helps coordinate how the Forestry Division monitors and manages many of the pests and pathogens that threaten our forests. You know, you drive up and down the roads this time of year especially and see a lot of dead wood along the highways and in the woods. We're all aware of some of those attacks and different pests. Hannah went to the University of Kentucky. She grew up in the Fall Branch area. She also got her bachelor's in forestry and then a master's in science in entomology, if that's that right. She joined the Division of Forestry about a year ago as a forest health specialist. Has got an opportunity to share all kinds of information with groups like this about our forests and our natural resources. She loves to learn about insects and other organisms present in our forests and enjoys getting to play a role in how we specifically manage insects or diseases that are impacting our Tennessee forests. She also loves sharing that information with groups like us and others, and there's brochures on the tape up here that those we passed around. I think she's waived the pop quiz part of the equation. So Hannah, come forward and let's give her a good pop.
All right, I'm not used to using a microphone, so we will give this a go. If it starts to fade away from my face and you can't hear me, just yell. All right, like Mark said, I work for the Tennessee Division of Forestry as the Forest Health Specialist. I've been there for about a year, although I originally grew up in Fall Branch here in this part of the state. And a lot of times I get asked, what exactly is forest health? Oh, wait. There we go. Because that's kind of a vague term. A lot of times we can think of different aspects of a forest that might make it unhealthy. We might see forests that don't have a lot of marketable timber or wildlife resources or other value in those aspects, and we might be able to say, okay, that forest is unhealthy. We might see a forest that has invasive plants and low species biodiversity. That's another aspect of what can damage a forest or cause it to be quote unquote unhealthy. And we also might see pests and pathogens. And that's one thing that I deal the most with because we have a lot of insects and diseases that come into our forests, both from other overseas and from other areas of the US that can cause damage. So the main components of a healthy forest, and I try to cover this, it involves a lot of different facets, including ecological function, species biodiversity, wildlife habitat, and marketability. And that can be timber, that can be non-timber forest products. There's a lot that goes into that. And ultimately, if we have a healthy forest, it provides a long-term productive system for wildlife, for other resources like that. So that's kind of why we want to focus on improving the health of our forest to provide that long-term sustainable flow of resources. So the big aspect that I help work with the Tennessee Division of Forestry is how we monitor and manage different pests and pathogens. We do this on both state lands, on our state forests, but we also have programs to help monitor even on private land or offer assistance to private landowners who are interested in managing their forests. So we monitor things like emerald ash borer, like invasive plants, like new diseases, and like non-native insects that are invading our forests. And then we use that information to help create management plans that are geared towards promoting forest health and mitigating the impacts. So this can be through silvicultural techniques, this can be through best management practices and invasive species management, or the treatments for pests and diseases. And I'll come back to that last bit because that's, again, what I deal the most with, are these pests and diseases.
What
Silviculture is techniques we use to manage forests. It's typically done on we call them tree or forest stands, but it's blocks of forest that have specific species we manage in a particular way. I also wanted to throw this in here, and this comes into one of our brochures. We have a couple programs in Tennessee for forest landowners. This can be for residents who have anywhere from an acre to 200 acres of forested land. We offer a variety of services that can assist these landowners. So this includes technical assistance. Each area of Tennessee has a specific forester that can come out, do a site visit, walk the land, and help identify potential value from your timber or wildlife habitat, things like that. We can also do forest health assessments to see what's already present in your forest and how can we improve the health and productivity of that forest. We also have other services we call vendor services that can be provided at cost, and these are to help implement management plans. So we have prescribed burning. I could go into detail on some of these, but a lot of these management strategies are our area foresters can provide more information than I can on that. So I will be sharing the area forester for Sullivan County, his contact information. But I'll hit the highlights just to get you started. So our area foresters can offer technical assistance, which is assessing resources, wildlife habitat, forest health, things like that. They go in and do a visit of the land, they walk through the land, and then they can also help write a management plan. And so that plan can help you go in and decide how you want to take care of your forest, or how you want to ultimately either harvest timber or get value from non-timber forest resources, things like that, depending on what the objective for your land is. And for Sullivan County, the area forester is Danny Osborne. His email is danny.osborne@tn.gov. He has the information on this technical assistance and this management plan writing. We also have financial assistance available for landowners who want to use different silvicultural techniques on their land based on these management plans. So that's specifically two brochures that we passed around. One was for TAPE for landowners. TAPE stands for the Tennessee Ag Enhancement Program, and the other is for the Southern Pine Beetle Initiative. Both of those are cost share programs, so a landowner would share a portion of the cost and the state would reimburse the other portion of that cost. I say all this because these are some of the resources that we as the Division of Forestry have to offer. I know that some folks do work with area foresters regularly and are aware of these opportunities, but I do want to highlight that because it's essentially a way that we can provide resources to residents of the state of Tennessee for this management, for forest management. But because I'm the forest health specialist, I want to cover more detail about forest health. This is my expertise. I am an entomologist by training, and I really do enjoy insects. So I'm going to share a bit about diseases and insects that we monitor here in Tennessee, and just give you a bit more of a background of that and how we manage them. So I want to start, sorry about the microphone. I want to start with 3 insects that we've been dealing with here in Tennessee for quite some time. This includes the European spongy moth. This used to be called gypsy moth, so you might have heard it by that name, but the name was changed earlier this year. We also deal with southern pine beetle and with hemlock woolly adelgid. So I'll dive into each of these. The European spongy moth, formerly called gypsy moth, is a defoliating insect. It was originally introduced from Europe in 1869, and the caterpillars feed on a wide variety of trees and shrubs and are herbivores. So they cause significant defoliation that can cover hundreds of thousands of acres. In the US, we've had, I believe, a total of 98 million acres defoliated over the course of the past century. So this is a very widespread pest, most prevalent in New England, but its range has expanded down closer to Tennessee. This pest isn't established in Tennessee, but we do find stray catches of it pretty much every year. So we have an annual survey that we conduct across the entire state to try to help identify populations of this moth before it establishes. And this allows us to manage it using aerial application of a treatment it's called a mating disruption treatment. It essentially causes the male moths to be unable to find female moths, and they cannot reproduce, and so that population will die out. So we do this in areas where we have high populations of this moth. This photo was taken in 2021 from Johnson County up near Doe Mountain, and we'll also be conducting a similar spray project also in Johnson County this coming year. So stuff like this is the way we use monitoring across the state to dictate how we're going to manage to protect our forests. And I'll also note this is on the Cherokee National Forest, so it's managed by the Federal Forest Service rather than the State Forest Service. Another insect, southern pine beetle. This beetle causes significant mortality to pine. It's native to North America, but periodically reaches outbreak levels. So we really aren't trying to eradicate this pest, we just try to monitor it to mitigate the impacts it might have. The last major historic outbreak we had in Tennessee was from '98 to 2002, and it was across several different counties in Tennessee, so it wasn't like one specific area. It was a pretty widespread outbreak. I always like including this photo just for reference. In the center of this hand is a grain of rice. To the right of that grain of rice is black turpentine beetle, a different pine pest. And to the left is southern pine beetle. So this beetle is half the size of a grain of rice. And even though it is tiny, it causes damage because it tunnels just beneath the bark within the vascular tissue of the tree and essentially girdles the tree. It prevents it from being able to move water and nutrients. So we can use different practices in pine forests that are specific to improving the health of pine and reducing its susceptibility to southern pine beetle. And this is part of what the Southern Pine Beetle Initiative cost share program does, is help support practices specific to southern pine beetle management. And this is another insect that we survey for every year. Another insect that you all may have heard of because it's been in this part of the state for quite some time is hemlock woolly adelgid. This is an aphid-like insect that was introduced from Japan in the 1920s, but was found in Tennessee in 2002. They form white fluffy masses on the underside of branches at the base of needles, and they essentially suck the sap from the tree and can cause hemlock mortality in 4 to 10 years. And we typically see in this part of the state, a hemlock tree can last around eight or so years before it succumbs to HWA mortality. But we do have some effective management strategies. We can use chemicals to treat a tree, and that treatment is effective for between 5 to 7 years. We have a crew that's funded through the Division of Forestry that acts as a strike team that goes onto public lands and treats hemlock. And they treat approximately 1,200 acres a year, which is actually a pretty significant amount of our hemlock. And they essentially will go out, conduct these treatments, and help preserve that hemlock stand, that group of hemlocks, for this 5 to 7 year period. And then they have to re-enter and treat again, but that's one of the current strategies we use. I will say that's kind of a band-aid treatment because ultimately we can't keep doing that forever. And so the main goal we want to strive towards is biological control. So the release of beetles that predate or eat HWA that can help reduce the population of that. So that's one thing we're working on, and it's a work in progress. I want to cover two an insect and a disease that are more recent to Tennessee. One, which I'm sure all of y'all have heard of, is emerald ash borer. That is a beetle that's been here, at least here in Upper East Tennessee, for quite some time. And then laurel wilt disease was just found in Tennessee about 3 years ago. So emerald ash borer is a beetle that attacks ash trees. It was introduced in Michigan in 2002 and specifically attacks, or it seems to prefer white and black ash. The larva will essentially tunnel beneath the bark, and just like southern pine beetle, it'll cut off the flow of water and nutrients, so it can kill a tree pretty quickly. Adults emerge and leave those very characteristic D-shaped exit holes. And this can typically kill a tree in 1 to 4 years. As of 2021, we'd found it in 65 counties. We were unable to survey for it this past year, but it might be a bit further west than that map. I think it was found here in Sullivan County in, I want to say 2012. So it's been in this area, and I can speak because the farm that I grew up on, we had a lot of ash that we had to take out the past few years. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of ways to manage for this pest. There are a few chemical treatments that can be used, but unlike what we use for hemlocks, this treatment only lasts for about a year, so you have to go in and retreat every year, and that's not really feasible most of the time. And then as soon as a tree is attacked and begins to decline, the tree can't recover from emerald ash borer damage, and so even if you start treating a tree that's already been attacked, the tree won't be able to recover. So we typically recommend folks either, if it's applicable, they can do a salvage harvest. So they could go in and try to get some timber from the ash, or they could cut firewood, things like that. Or they might consider removing hazard trees. So trees that are near structures or power lines or like sidewalks, things like that, that could pose a hazard if they were to fall. Those we've seen a lot with ash trees in urban and residential areas pose a hazard when EAB comes through. So removal of hazard trees is sometimes necessary. Another disease that I want to cover is laurel wilt. This is a disease that was originally found in Georgia in 2002, and it was first found in West Tennessee in 2019. The disease essentially causes a fungal growth just beneath the bark, that dark staining just beneath the bark. And the fungus is typically carried by red bay ambrosia beetle, the beetle on the right, but it's sometimes carried by other beetles, so it's not necessarily obligate of red bay ambrosia beetle. This is a map just showing where it started in down here in Georgia and South Carolina. It spread and it kind of jumped into Tennessee and West Tennessee and has since spread across a fair bit of West Tennessee and even into East Tennessee. In Tennessee, we see it kill sassafras and spicebush, and it has spread into 20 counties since it was first introduced in 2019. So this is the county map specific to Tennessee. And you'll see, like in 2020 was when it was found in Kingsport, and we actually did a training event here in Kingsport on how to identify this because it was so prevalent here in some farms closer to Bristol. But the symptoms we typically see are flagging and dieback in the branch and staining of the wood just beneath the bark. That's caused by the fungus itself. And just like the insects that damage that vascular tissue, the fungus essentially clogs up the vascular tissue and can cause wilting and the tree to die within about a year. When the ambrosia beetle attacks a tree, it will produce the sawdust toothpicks as seen on the far right photo. They tend to be visible at the entry or the exit holes of those insects, but they tend to get washed off by rain or wind, so sometimes that symptom is not visible. Okay, after I gave you a whirlwind tour of the insects and diseases we deal with currently, I do want to highlight very briefly 2 insects that are not currently in Tennessee but are in neighboring states that we monitor for regularly. So that includes Asian longhorn beetle and spotted lanternfly. And I'll start with spotted lanternfly because that's closer to our border, and this is one that we expect to find in Tennessee at some point because it has approached close to up here in Upper East Tennessee. This insect was first discovered in 2014 in Pennsylvania. It prefers tree of heaven and a few other hardwood species, as well as some horticultural or fruit tree, things like that. In Pennsylvania, in some areas where it's well established, it'll create these aggregations, or they'll essentially swarm. Excuse me. But they damage trees by sucking the sap, and it's kind of a slow death to the tree, and sometimes this will trigger other insects to attack a tree. So it's not necessarily the direct causal agent of a tree's death, but it contributes to it. That feeding of the insect also produces honeydew, which can lead to sooty mold growth, which is also a bit of a nuisance in residential areas. The current distribution, again, has not been found in Tennessee, but in 2021, it was found in 2 counties in Southwest Virginia, and then just this past summer was found in North Carolina. So this is an insect that we monitor for, and one of our biggest, concerns is that it'll be found here and have been here for a couple years before we actually identify it. That being said, I want to teach you all how to identify it. In case you see it, you can report it. And this is one of the biggest ways that we might be able to detect this early. So the first nymph instar, so the one that would appear in early spring right after it hatches out of its egg, is black with distinct white spots, and its front legs are kind of stilted, so it kind of stands up funny. Later in the summer, midsummer, it'll develop red stripes on its back, and then by the end of summer, it'll develop into an adult. And this adult is pretty distinctive because of that bright red patch on the hind wing, but when it's just sitting at rest, it hides that bright patch, so sometimes that might not be visible. And then you'd only see the front wing that essentially is just that tan with the distinct black dots. If you do happen to see this, we have an email address that can be reported to. It's just spotted.lanternfly@tn.gov. And again, this part of the state is kind of where we expect we would find it, and so this is where we're kind of emphasizing our surveys. Last but not least, Asian longhorn beetle. This is an insect, a beetle, that was first discovered in New York in 1996 and is now found in 4 states, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but this beetle is incredibly damaging to maples and other hardwoods because it tunnels throughout the tree and essentially creates Swiss cheese of the trunk and stems. The beetle is huge, larvae are huge, and they tunnel in those trunks and stems and essentially can kill a tree in about a year or 2. The exit holes are typically like perfectly circular and around the width of a number 2 pencil. So this beetle is interesting because it doesn't have like a central range where it's spread out from. It's spread very sporadically across the US since it was first found in '96. The 2 arrows in blue are areas where the beetle has actually been eradicated. So they found a population, they were able to take care of it. In Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, and South Carolina, they're still currently working to try to get rid of this pest. Specifically made the one in South Carolina the largest because that was just found in 2020, so that's the most recent introduction of this pest. And it was suspected that it was found in firewood that was transported to the state. And because Tennessee has so many recreational areas where firewood is a potential hazard in this case, this is an emphasis that we've placed on this pest because it's transported in firewood so easily. So another photo of a tree that's just been riddled with ALB holes. and a bigger picture of the long antenna, which is one of the characteristics of this beetle. And just to distinguish, we do have some native longhorn beetles that have those long antennae. The ones, both Asian longhorn beetle and other non-native species, tend to have black and white banded antennae, that's like very distinctly alternating bands of those colors. Okay, now that I've talked y'all's ear off about insects and diseases, I want to share a few other resources. So I work for the Division of Forestry, but we collaborate with a lot of other agencies, organizations, researchers at universities, because managing and monitoring forest health pests is a collaborative effort. We recognize that as a state agency. We encourage folks, residents or folks who are involved in communities to just consider this. When you're managing a forest, when you're out on a hike, if you see something, always feel free to report it, because we are monitoring for a lot of diseases and insects here. And I think that's all I had. I want to thank you all for listening to me talk, and if you have any questions, anything like that, I'll take a couple minutes, I guess.